After a roller coaster year for the economy, the U.S. job market appears to be slowing, at least for now. Some forecasts suggest hiring could remain sluggish early in 2026 before improving later in the year as businesses weigh trade policy, immigration changes, and the growing role of artificial intelligence. To help us make sense of what lies ahead for workers and employers in 2026, we're joined by John Diamond, the Senior Fellow in Public Finance and the Senior Director of the Center for Tax and Budget Policy at Rice University's Baker Institute. And if you have a question for John, you can give us a call or send us a text, 713-440-8870.
You know, John, let me just start with something that's very basic, but in understanding how all this works. We constantly keep getting out these job numbers, the job numbers, the job. Does it move enough? Do these changes from report to report really accurately show what's happening? Or it's because it's so close together each time, we really don't get a full picture of what's going on. Do you understand where I'm going with that? It's like we're looking too closely all the time and don't get the full landscape.
First, thanks for having me. And I get where you're going. So it's a question about uncertainty. Are we getting the broader picture? Are we kind of focusing in too narrowly?
Right, because I also wonder the amount of jobs we talk about. When you look at the nation as a whole and the number of jobs we have. So it's 5,000 more than we thought, or 50,000 more than we thought, or down more. In the grand scheme of things, are these blips worth noticing?
Actually, they are.
Okay.
So we can add all the blips up and get like the yearly numbers. So we can say, and the numbers for 2025 were that 584,000 jobs were added in 2025. And we could compare that to 2024 when roughly 2 million jobs were added. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big difference over the full year. And if you broke that down monthly, it would be, 49,000 jobs per month on average in 2025 versus something around 150,000 jobs per month added in 2024. And so those trends are important, and I think that's why they keep track of them.
But when we see those numbers, are we taking into consideration saturation points? So when you add more jobs in a year, the next year you have less available jobs, wouldn't you? Or am I looking at this way too basically?
I don't think there's a saturation point necessarily. It depends on the population.
Okay.
So if the population continues to grow, then your jobs should continue to grow. So if the population grows faster than your job growth, then you have a real problem.
But is that what those numbers are telling us?
They don't tell us that specifically, in that they're only referencing the job side. So
Right.
You have to go find the data on the population side. With these numbers, they do report numbers like the jobs to or the employment population ratio and stuff like that. So there is stuff that connects to that within the official report. It's not as widely reported as the jobs number,
Right.
which gets a lot of attention. My big concern is the uncertainty in these numbers. Mm-hmm. The way the numbers are estimated is it comes out as two reports. There's a household report, which is a survey of households, and there's an employment report, which is a survey of businesses. They use the household report to kind of give flavor. They look at things like sex and race and income level and location, so they can get location-specific effects. The employment report they use to get important details like industry effects and so forth. And so through those two surveys, they try to pick up kind of everything. But those surveys miss a really important piece of the job market, and that's firms that either start or die. So firms that have closed recently or firms that have just opened. You can't survey a firm that didn't exist, and you can't survey one that just closed. Mm-hmm. And so on top of those two surveys, they layer on what's called the birth-death model, and they try to predict how many new jobs are created because new firms open, and how many old jobs did we lose because old firms closed. And that is where a lot of the uncertainty has been in the last 2 years.
So if you're breaking it down, talking about sector differences, and we're looking at the sector differences and we're looking at firms that have closed, who would you say when we're looking within those areas is struggling? I mean, would it be, healthcare and social assistance? Are we looking at technical services? Who really is struggling at this moment?
So over the last couple of years, healthcare and social assistance has by far been the strongest part of the job market.
Okay.
In 2024, the government provided a lot of the job gains of those 2 million jobs. In 2025, that's been exactly the opposite.
Okay.
The government has lost around 300,000 jobs. Across time, retail trade, over the last 2 years, retail trade, manufacturing have taken a hit and have been probably the slowest they've suffered the largest losses over the last couple of years.
So if we're circling in on manufacturing, then how much of that hit has been taken because of new policies such as tariffs and the president wanting to move manufacturing into the U.S.?
Well, it definitely hasn't worked. If you base it off of the jobs numbers, manufacturing has continued, but this trend was ongoing before the tariffs.
Okay.
Manufacturing has been struggling for really much of the last 15 or 20 years.
Why, John?
But that trend has just continued. It's a mix of trade effects, of other countries being able to produce goods that are equal quality to ours at lower prices. So if you look at like cars and stuff like that, and you can compare a worker in Mexico that works in a car plant earning $7 a day versus a U.S. worker earning $77 a day, and it doesn't take much to realize you're going to get a cheaper car if you produce at least part of the components in Mexico. And then, technology. We continue to see technology play a major role in manufacturing and the way we produce goods in the manufacturing sector.
Let me ask you this, though. When we look at, when you talk about manufacturing, and the first thing my head goes to is, technology is always changing and how we approach the world is always changing. As we move more into technical things, as we move more into AI, it's going to shift where people work and where the job market is. Can you look back over other periods of time and see how quickly we adapted as things around us changed and built back up the job market? Or is there no parallels we can look at to see how we're doing in this moment?
No, there are a lot of parallels. We can look all the way back to, Henry Ford's production method change of the assembly line. We can look to the late 1990s and kind of the beginning of the internet and the web and computer software in terms of a computer with word processing software, which really impacted the executive assistant roles and the fear then was that look how many people are in those roles. And what are we going to do when all of those people are unemployed? Yet we actually ended up with more of those people after the word processor, not less, because it made their job more productive. We could see the same thing in AI. AI could make workers more productive and increase their productivity. I think we're actually seeing some of that now. Productivity is off the charts this last year. Much higher than expected. And as workers become more productive, that means they're cheaper to hire because for each hour they work, they produce more output. So paying their wages is more affordable. So I do think there's a lot of examples in history we can look back on.
And so looking at those, and I'm guessing you kind of already answered that, how are we faring this time around? It looks like we're moving in a good direction. With these advancements, it's actually helping.
It's always a trade-off. So there's always winners and losers, and we need to be clear about that. And there's always a painful transition period where workers have to retool themselves and gain new skills to participate and benefit from the new technologies. And we are at the front end of that process. And so whereas there will be large benefits, there will be some contained costs from people having to go through that transition period.
So I guess that goes back to my very first question was, so then looking at these job numbers and these little moments as we go along may be missing the bigger picture of there has to be a transition period as we advance technologically, but that there is a payoff coming. Is there a way to reflect that when we look at numbers?
I get what you're saying there. And yes, are the job numbers all we need to look at? Absolutely not. It's a very small piece of a much larger labor market. And they're really a backward-looking measure of how are things in the past. And then, looking forward, we can't really look at these job numbers to tell us what's going to happen in the next year. But we can look at the trend over the last 6 months and say, well, increases in the number of jobs have been declining every month since April. That's a problem, and that's a trend that I expect will continue for the next several months. But it's also a trend that should turn around hopefully sometime in 2026. And so that trend helps. Now, we need to pair that with some forward-looking analysis, but that's not in the data. That's stuff we have to go and find and use other data to figure out, okay, how's AI going to affect this labor market? How are the tariffs going to affect this labor market? How will it affect manufacturing versus how will it affect banking and other regulated industries? And so it's a very complex puzzle when you start trying to project things as opposed to looking at trends in past data.
We're speaking to John Diamond, the Senior Fellow in Public Finance and the Senior Director of the Center of Tax and Budget Policy at the Baker Institute. You're listening to Hello Houston. You can join the conversation at 713-440-8870. We did receive a YouTube comment from Nicole Joe who says there were a lot of layoffs in oil and gas in 2025. Have these people been able to find new jobs, or is the oil and gas industry not really hiring? John, what do you think about the oil and gas industry and when we look at jobs?
I think this is going to be true for all industries right now, outside of a couple. They keep tagging this economy the no hire, no fire economy. In October, we did see a large number of job losses across industries, and the oil industry was obviously a large part of that. I think at this point in time, if you get laid off, it's a really bad position to be in. I think it's really hard for a middle-aged person to find a new job if they get laid off. I also think on the front end of the labor market, we're seeing it with college graduates. They're having a very hard time finding jobs. And that's just because firms aren't expanding their labor force right now. They don't want to commit to those types of decisions. And so everybody's just kind of standing firm. They really don't want to release workers, but they also don't want to add to their current stock of workers.
But it's interesting because I was graduating college around 2008. We all know what was happening around 2008 when there was, a pretty big employment crash. And so what can we learn from that moment? Are there any parallels? Is there anything that we can take away looking at kind of that no fire, no hire type situation that we're in now?
2008 was very different from today. We were on the back end of a giant financial crisis.
Yeah.
And all of the uncertainty stemmed around how were we going to kind of rebuild our financial infrastructure. And I think past financial crises has indicated kind of what we knew, which is it's a very slow path out of that because economic growth takes lending and financial expansions, and we just weren't in a place to do that. Today's very different. We don't face a financial crisis from the private sector. We do have we do face struggles in the government sector in terms of the size of their deficits and debt. But most of our problems are around policy issues dealing with tariffs, dealing with unaffordability, very, very high regulatory pressures, and geopolitical strains. And so I think we could have a much faster recovery this year than we saw post-2008, which is the good news.
Right.
I expect that when things turn, they will turn quickly, and we will be in our next boom. I just don't know how long before we get there. And I should point out that part of the economy is currently still in the boom.
Right.
I mean, this economy is very two-faced. I mean, there's the slow part of the economy, and then there's AI data centers, energy for those data centers, investment in AI is absolutely blowing up. I mean, that is in just a massive growth pattern.
So I guess you answered my next question, was where do you see the engines of growth in the job market in 2026 moving forward? Would you say those industries?
I think it's all of those industries.
Yeah.
That's where everything is going to be happening. In fact, just the amount of investment pouring into the AI sector is actually stealing, or slowing down growth in other sectors just because the payoffs are larger.
And I think we've talked about this, actually us on this show, that the idea of an AI bubble and that it's going to burst and that all of this is just going to collapse. Do you feel that or no?
I don't think that's possible. Is it possible that these private firms could be incapable of producing profits to pay off all of their debts and complete this $1 billion that's in a very circular method running through NVIDIA to OpenAI to Anthropic and back through the circle again? That is absolutely possible, and I think that is where people fear the bubble. But I guess when I step back and look at it, geopolitically, this is a race. This is the Cold War of the 1950s and 60s. And the U.S. is in competition with China to see who can produce AI and to get the gains from AI quickest. So I don't think the federal government can let the bubble burst. I think they're going to keep inflating or feeding this bubble, until we win this competition. And so I don't think there's could there be a private sector bubble? Yes. But I think the federal government would be forced to step in and bail that out fairly quickly if they even allowed it to ever happen at all.
Mm-hmm. John Diamond is a senior fellow in public finance and the senior director of the Center for Tax and Budget Policy at Rice University's Baker Institute. John, thanks for always coming and joining us on Hello Houston.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Coming up.